All right. So this week we're just doing a quick discussion on a movie that you and I both saw and liked
Yes.
very much, and that movie was "Won't You Be My Neighbor," the little biopic on Mister Rogers, which
Yeah.
I thought was incredibly wholesome and is
Yes.
about neck and neck with Paddington 2 for being one of the most wholesome movies I've ever seen in my life.
I think that's fair.
Um, Currently, this is getting rave reviews, and basically everyone is crying because of how
Yes.
wholesome and wonderful it is. On Rotten Tomatoes, it currently has a 99%
Wow.
with critics, just one less than Paddington 2, and a 97% with audiences, and is at an 8.7 on IMDb.
Yeah.
So, yeah, now that we've gotten the general positive reaction of everyone else out, what did you think of the movie, Zach?
I really love this film, and I not having too much exposure with like Fred Rogers too much. Like I've seen a couple clips from his like from the show and everything, but I never really was entirely invested. But I knew of him, and I knew of his overall kind and positive attitude. Seeing his life story now really resonated with me a lot, and I think it resonated with really anyone that went to go see it,
Yeah,
but especially with like personally for me as like an educator, like working with kids and everything, the empathy that if I could have 1/10 of the of the empathy that he had for any of one of my students, like it would be just phenomenal. That person, like that man, absolutely impacted these lives of children and adults in a major
yeah,
positive way. Anyone that even tries to replicate that should be applauded for trying.
yeah.
Yeah, and I that's why we're really doing this, is because you need to go see this film and then try your best to live
Yeah,
in,
because
in that
that's
way.
I feel like the most not jarring the most possibly upsetting point of the movie was his constant fear that people would not understand the importance of what he was doing. Not that
Hmm.
he was like an egomaniac and was like, what I'm doing is
Yeah,
special. It was just he knew how to talk to children, and it wasn't that he was trying to make himself number one. He knew that if he didn't say it, no one else would.
yep,
And the movie touches on things like assassination, divorce, race relations, the
yeah,
war. And these are all things that, well, a general audience would probably say, well, you can't tell kids that, like, they won't understand it. He knew how to speak with these people,
hmm,
and not even just children, because one of the best parts of the movie, in my opinion, which is something that I've watched many times separately too, is
okay,
when he has to fight for PBS funding.
yep,
And it's just the complete 180 that he can bring out of someone else just through the compassion that he's showing. And
hmm,
never once did he mention, this is for me. Like, think about the studio, think about
yeah,
like what's going on here. He just said, this is for the children. And like, that is what has the biggest impact on me.
yeah,
And as someone who watched him as often as I could, more times when I was sick, because I don't think it was ever on at a convenient time other
yep,
than that. But yeah, it's just he's always been someone I thought of as, even if I don't directly say, oh, he made me this way, or he's the reason that I'm comfortable with myself. There, those messages were always underlying in there.
yeah,
And if I ever wanted to just sit down and watch something wholesome, sweet, inoffensive, but still had something to say, I always knew that Mister
yeah.
Rogers was there.
And I think like the really like what this documentary does very well, or biopic, is it kind of shows that wholesomeness as opposed to what else was on TV a lot of the time as well.
Yeah,
Like you kind of you if you know what the show is even remotely about, you kind of like are blinded to just what that show was. I never even thought to compare it to the Transformers and all that stuff,
yeah,
where it is for children it's just automatic stimulus to get you watching the screen, and the moment that you lose attention it'll flash something else,
yeah,
where it's just because that's how you, on a like the most fundamental rudimentary level, that's how you get people's attention, is by yelling and screaming at them. Whereas in this show he knew that's how these other shows are doing it,
yeah,
but that is not how you educate or you reach a child in a actual formative way at
yeah,
all. And the intent behind that and how intentional he knew like how to do that was just baffling, and like highly regarded as like that is incredible, but it's also really, where else do you see that? And
exactly.
you don't, because only like it's not that only he could do it, it's that other people could do it, but you have to be willing and ready to be quiet.
Yeah.
The whole section on silence,
That
oh
it
my
was,
god.
yeah, that's something I've never fully thought of, but just watching it, there is a necessity for silence. There's a necessity for just giving space to what's being said, so that way it has the time to have the impact that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, yeah, a big thing with him was just having an overall impact, and every single thing that showed up in it, while it may have been visually appealing to a child, at the same time its sole purpose is to teach you something.
Yeah.
And that's just something to truly be admired, and it's just one of the reasons why he's just renowned as one
Mm-hmm.
of the just greatest educators and just people who've ever existed. Because I know two people, one of my professors worked close with him,
That's awesome.
and just,
Yeah.
so has pictures of him because he would make time for every single person who he ever met. One of my aunt's friends was a overweight child,
Mm-hmm.
met Mr. Rogers, and he was like, oh, like, people don't like me because I'm fat. He's like, well, it's not about like what you look like, it's about who you are, and
Yeah.
just stuff like that, where it sounds corny if it were coming from a place of insincerity.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he is so genuine in every single thing that he said, and even if he never went through it, he was willing to talk it through with you.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to have someone like that.
And I also think it speaks a lot to the general fear of people of talking about difficult things, leaving that time for silence, because it is extremely difficult to be quiet. Like once you really try and figure out how to do it, like personally for me, when you ask a question to a class and I have to stand there and no one's answering, I am struck with fear because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what like. But for me as a new educator, I have to count 6 seconds in my head to make sure I don't. Oh, okay, you had your hand up first, because that is just the hardest thing to learn and to train how to do. So I'm really gonna try now, seeing Mr. Rogers' skills. But the other aspect aside from just the education aspect of it too, was I was blown away and very deeply saddened about all the hate that he received
Yeah.
from news media to just the regular people on the street. Seeing him have to address well, not address directly, but being blamed for this whole issue of the entitled generation that exists now, and seeing him go basically there was news reports out about the entitlement of the generation that is currently coming out of college now.
If everyone tells you you're special, is anyone really special?
Yeah. And then him defending that by saying, what I meant by that is that you have to do nothing in order to be loved. That is like, of the many emotional points of this movie, that's where I was like, oh no, like it hit home. And that is something that if you like thinking about all the times where you actually tell somebody, oh, I love you for who you are, and being in the moment completely and saying that is extremely impactful. But how often does a person really do that? Even to their own kids, they can say, "Oh, I love you." It's just like, but there's also sitting down, going to their face, and being like, "Listen, I love you for who you are," and then like hugging them. Like that is.
I don't think I've ever wanted to hug everyone in the theater more than walking out of that. And if it were more socially acceptable, God damn it, I would have done it. I've never cried for 2 hours straight before, basically. But just, even him just doing the intro, I was already like, I'm not going to make it through this. And I didn't. And I had to keep stopping every once in a while. And it's even things, they have no direct impact on me. Like, I never had to deal with racism. I never had to deal with homophobia. I had to deal with being a fat kid, but they kind of glossed over that because there are bigger fish to fry. But it's just every single thing, you could just see how genuine he was about it.
Mm-hmm.
And back to what you were saying, just the horribleness that anyone could possibly say that he's responsible for any bad, basically, that's just disgusting to me. And one of the things they brought up is whether or not how he would exist in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he could have done it. And like, that's what scares me more than anything else, is seeing how positive an impact he had on obviously the people watching the movie and the people who made the movie and who it was dedicated to. But there's still people out there who insist that everything he did was wrong, or are trying to push back against other things. And that's why you need someone like him. And even if, Also, I might just be devaluing him because he was stronger than everyone else in that aspect. But
They also like in like the Bible, he clearly says that doing all the things that he was doing for children, for adults at the time that he was doing it, was extremely hard on him.
yeah,
And it was mentally and physically tolling on him to do that. And that was in, I mean, again, that was in the prime of, the dealing with, he had to deal with September 11th. That was, that was
Yeah.
after his show had already concluded, I guess, right?
I've
Or,
never
like,
been
around
more
there.
sad that someone didn't die. Like, that sounds really wrong, but that man did not deserve to have to go through dealing with that. And it
Yeah.
just,
I think if you're going to take anything, like, away from this film, from, like, the larger impact, and we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, is that what would he do here and now with like the strength and bravery that he had when he was doing the show in his prime, and even until like basically his death, what he was doing, and the idea that now that the baton has been like passed to all of us to try and take up that mantle, as difficult as it is to do, we all have to try.
yeah,
And I think that was his big thing, where it's like love and appreciate who you are because of who you are, and also love your neighbor.
exactly.
And if you can do that and be authentic about it, it goes up. Like it starts in your neighborhood, and it goes to the nation. It goes to the world.
Exactly.
It doesn't stop there, but you have to be vigilant, and it's not easy to always do either. And I think he just like exemplifies that. He was very clear to a generation of people that that's what you need to do. Well, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. So it's now our responsibility to share that message. And I also think, being that this is released in 2018, is important,
Yeah.
because we need to hear these words again to go forward.
Because at this point, there is basically a whole generation of kids who don't know Mr. Rogers.
Yeah,
And, like, that's a scary thought to me. And I think it's important for them to keep passing this message along. And I hope that this movie gets a wide viewing audience,
Yeah.
which, I mean, when we saw it, the theater wasn't full, but obviously people love it. It made its
Yeah.
budget back, at least. And with any grace of any higher power, it will win, like, the best documentary Oscar or something.
Yeah.
So that way, at least it has some acknowledgement in a greater sense that might get it seen by someone else.
Yeah.
Because even if you didn't know who Mr. Rogers was, just seeing this, you can understand the entire impact.
Yeah.
And as someone who watched all of it, all I could think of was, I hope there is a means to find all this stuff when I eventually have kids.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. All right. So go see this movie if you have not already.
Please do. Yeah. And bring a box of tissues. It won't be enough. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed this, and we very much encourage you to go out and see this wonderful, wonderful movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor?